Okay, well, let's see.
It's okay.
Yeah, but well, all right. Okay, well, then tonight, what a timely section or discovery to be on as we prepare ourselves for Holy Week. So we're on discovery number 21, and let me pull up our opening discussion piece here, a reflection, I guess. Let me share my screen. Okay. And I'll go ahead and read this here. Just some kind of interesting. Oops. Of course, I just. In World War II, so you've been told, it was clear after the Allies got a secure beachhead on the European continent that the decisive battle had been won, even though months of fighting were still ahead. And this helps you to see how the cross is still a victory. After 1900 years, in a world where the contest between God and evil is not yet over, in which the fighting is still going on. For the cross is the decisive victory, the established beachhead, the one that makes plain who has already won the final victory. For here, so you continue to believe, evil has its supreme chance to defeat God and could not. This is the faith that sustains you in dark times, that summons you to action when the odds seem overwhelmingly against you, that keeps you confident and hopeful, for you believe in the ultimate triumph of God. No wonder then, if this is true, that Christians in all ages have seen in the cross not a symbol of degradation and despair, but a symbol of exaltation and victory. There has been a triumph. It is God's triumph. Christ is victor. He rules as the Lord of life. The place of the skull has become a throne. And this will be our reflection, of course, tonight in our readings. Let me just scroll down here and I'll open us with this prayer. Forgiving God, we come to know the amazing depth of your love through your Son, Jesus. During our time together, enlarge our hearts and minds to comprehend the timeless significance of his crucifixion and resurrection. As we read and discuss the sacred stories, we yearn to encounter life-changing good news. Breathe upon us the blessing of life made brand new in Christ and the hope of redemption through him. In Jesus' name, we offer our prayers. Amen. So, well, we've got a lot to take a look at here, so I think we should just dig in and share some of our notes, beginning with Mark 11, 1 through 11. And our questions, remember that as we're going about our search tonight, what changes in mood occurred from the day of Jesus' triumphal entry until his crucifixion 6 days later? So looking for changes in mood. How did the disciples interpret the events as they were taking place? And what are some words that you would use to describe the emotions of Jesus, the disciples, and the Jewish religious leaders and other eyewitnesses to these during these days? So we're kind of taking a look through the eyes of others and looking for how these things were interpreted. So yeah, Jesus enters Jerusalem. What happens in this passage?
Well, I wrote down more moods and stuff, but I said it's the triumphal entry. The crowds are jubilant, shouting Hosanna. They welcome Jesus, but that Jesus seems to be pensive and contemplative. That I wrote a quote. He went into the temple, and when he had looked around at everything, he went out to Bethany. So that's just what I wrote.
Yeah. What do you think? Do other people, what was Jesus' mood, you think?
Well, I don't think he was joyful. He knew what he was fulfilling the prophecy.
Mhm.
Knew that. You know, it's interesting, and I guess it was Matthew fills this whole week with so many things that the others don't, you know, that Jesus did. He just kept.
Yeah, Jesus is definitely a busy man during this time.
Yeah.
I had a sense that for some of these passages, Jesus seems almost like he's, I'm probably reading onto it, but like that he is sort of outside of himself,
Yeah.
looking at the situation.
Yeah.
Anyone else find it strange? And I mean, this is a story or I guess a method that's repeated again when the disciples are sent to find the place where they're going to celebrate the Passover. But Jesus says, yeah, go into the city. You're going to find somebody there.
Well, he knows. It's like he knows. And part of you is like, okay, is it the human thing? Like he made arrangements ahead of time? Or is it
Particularly if
the
there are a
God
million
thing?
people there for Passover.
Yeah, or is it the God thing that like he just knows that this is going to happen?
Well, but even the way it happens,
Yeah.
it's like, you'll see somebody, then follow them, as
Yeah.
opposed to like, hey, just go to this
Mhm.
address and, talk to, Bill there and he'll get you hooked up.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That makes me feel like he's done some advanced work.
Yeah, or something. I'm not really sure what to make of some of these things. I think the more I read some of this, I'm not as concerned about trying to figure all of it out too. But those of us who looked at the text already for the Bible study, like John and Tom, we were
Bible study.
The morning-
This is a Bible study.
the weekly Bible study fish company. We looked at the text, the triumphal entry from Matthew is what we're going to be looking at on Sunday, and in that one, there's a clear link between like a fulfillment of Zechariah 9:9, the idea of Jesus riding on a colt, and I noticed that Mark doesn't have that symbolism, spelled out exactly. And it makes me wonder if, how much of this stuff did the disciples understand? And,
So just a question, wasn't Mark supposed to be pretty young
yeah, what was
during
that?
this time? Well, I'm just wondering if things wouldn't have had the same impact as they would have had on older people. I mean, these are all different authors. They all obviously think different things are important. They're all writing to different target audiences. But if you're young and you're 18 or 19 and you're following Jesus, is that going to impact you? Like, say, if you're 35, it could be totally different. I don't know.
I think that Mark's understanding of this symbolism was that the people in the crowd would also understand that symbolism.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So the fact that we don't is because we're 2,000 years later.
Well, it's not that we don't, but it's not spelled out for the reader. Like in Mark, it's not spelled out that this is, to fulfill or referencing specifically. I don't know.
Well, Mark is just generally briefer than Matthew too. So
Yeah.
I kind
Any
of wonder.
other observations from the triumphal entry? About the cleansing of the temple.
Oh. So this is the one that I explored more deeply later on. I said that Jesus is showing true righteous indignation. I mean, we talk about that. Oh, he's got righteous indignation, but is it really, he's overturning the money changers' tables, condemning their actions by quoting the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah. The chief priests and scribes are afraid of him, and quote, the whole crowd was spellbound by his teaching, end quote. So those are some of the kind of things and emotions and whatever that are going on.
Well,
And then when night comes, he and the disciples leave the city, and I was thinking,
Mhm.
are they fearful? Are they like going off to hide a little bit?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. What do you think? Was he nervous then?
I
Or
don't
was it
think he's
just,
nervous.
I want to get out of the city to pray?
I think he's very intentional. He knows what's going to happen and how soon it's going to happen. And this is his, you might say, pinnacle of being able to, just like cleansing the temple. He's got to do this. He's got to get these things done.
Well, and it's interesting because, obviously when it's evening, then it's darker. Again, with Matthew, I compared them. Matthew keeps talking about how the chief priests and the scribes and the leaders are looking for ways to kill him.
Yeah.
Can't do it because it's daylight. There's all these people. There are kids in Matthew's account shouting Hosanna. But if it's dark, maybe they could have killed him sooner, and he knew it wasn't time. I don't know.
Well, he talks many times about in the light.
Yeah.
You can work in the light.
Do you think he did this to provoke the religious leaders? Or was it just something that he was just sort of overwhelmed in the moment?
I kind of had the feeling, neither one of those, but that he had to make sure he'd accomplished everything and let the people know, hey, this is, a house of worship. It's not supposed to be a place to trade
Yeah.
animals and coins.
That's what I was thinking. Is it's like, I think he was frustrated though to see
Oh, yeah.
how different the temple had become and how it was like this commerce and people were cheating other people and all this kind of thing. And it's like, hey, this place is a place to worship and learn about God.
Mhm.
That is it. And
It's interesting that in the Gospel of John, this happens the first
Mhm.
time that he goes to the Pentecost, or
Mhm.
to the celebration that John's talking about.
Mhm.
Did this happen more than once? We're not sure.
Mhm.
And was it John's gospel that talks about tearing this temple down?
In 3 days,
3
they'll
days.
build it up again. Mhm.
John's gospel is very different from the other three as far as what happens during this time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The core events are still there, but the way he tells it is very different.
Backing up a second, did anybody do their comparison on the triumphal entry? No.
Yeah.
And then Becca did cleansing the temple. Anybody else in that one? Okay. All right. I'll ask you as we kind of go through. I'll be kind of curious. I'll make a note here. How about any other things on the cleansing the temple before we move on?
Well, just that we've moved very quickly from this triumphal entry to something that has a total different tone,
Yeah.
really quickly.
I think part of our discussion on Tuesday, the men's fish company, was how intentional was Jesus being in all of this.
Anyone want to kind of weigh in on what they think that the crowds, the crowds were doing? The crowds throughout these passages, I mean, they're sort of there, even if they're not acknowledged as much, right? That there's, the crowds at the entering in, when he enters Jerusalem, when he's cleansing the temple. Even the Passover part, there's some people that are bystanders that see what what they're doing and things. So, or maybe that's the with finding the colt. But anyway, how do you think the crowds that had just cheered Jesus coming into Jerusalem, how do you think they're reacting to Jesus cleansing the temple?
Well, I said that the mood, when we did this whole scene or whatever, I said that the mood was like chaos at first, at least. And people are probably like, what is he doing? But then in the Gospels that talk about what he does after that, where he's teaching and healing and doing all this, it says the whole crowd is spellbound. I mean, they're amazed. They're like, wow, So I think they're fascinated by him. So I don't think they're against him at this point, other than like the leaders. That most of the people are like, wow, maybe he really is the king. We've said Hosanna and all this, and look at what he's doing. He's capable of so much.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
occurs to me that part of the crowd comes from this area where Jesus has been preaching and healing around Galilee. But there's probably a major part of the crowd that isn't from there. They're either from Jerusalem or other outlying regions.
Mhm.
And so they haven't gotten a chance to warm up to Jesus yet.
Mhm.
Jesus hasn't done healings on TikTok and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. And adding on to what you're all saying, it just seems like there's a lot of kind of energy here. There's a lot of agitation and energy and questioning and excitement and a whole bunch. It's not just like this peaceful little time. It's pretty stirred up.
Yeah.
A very unique Passover time for them.
Yeah.
I think the changing of the money at exorbitant prices, if Jesus was against that probably made the crowds happier,
Oh, yeah.
If there had been fairness in that exchange, probably this wouldn't have happened, that Jesus
Right.
would have
Hmm.
gone in the temple, cleansed the temple.
What would Jesus cleanse in American Christianity
Whew.
today? Maybe we can leave that as a rhetorical question.
Yeah, that's
Um,
a lot.
all right, how about we move on to the Gethsemane? Oh, I'm sorry, Passover meal. I skipped that one. Yeah, Passover meal.
I had a question there.
Go ahead. What?
I had a question. I was wondering, it seems like the preparation for the location of the meal may have been sort of secretive, but was it?
You mean like secretive so that they could avoid any, Pharisees kind of coming down on them or something?
Interference. I mean, I don't have that passage open in my Bible, but just like we're going to go to this house, I've made arrangements over at this place. Or is that just the way it was back then?
It's kind of a last minute deal that the morning of the day that they're going to celebrate the meal is when they're lining up their dining room.
Mhm.
I'm
Right.
sorry, what's that again? What?
Oh, go ahead. Say it again, John. He didn't hear.
What was that again, John?
The arrangements for the room for the Passover feast are made the morning of the day that they're going to be eating. And any place that we go that's going to take even 12 people on our reservation, you normally would sign up a little ahead of that.
It's interesting. I agree with you, yet at the same time, they wouldn't have had the wherewithal to really do anything in advance, right? All these people are kind of coming in and you can't send them a letter necessarily, to book in advance. You obviously can't look on your phone and or call or something like that. So there's some element, I think, that's.
But you wonder, I mean, this person whose house it was in, to have this large enough upper room, had to have been reasonably well off to have a house big enough to do this. Like, would not everybody have known, oh
Yes.
yeah, this is the guy to go to. We go to him every Passover or something. I don't know.
But what, so And you know what's interesting, again, it's really strange the way that the methodology, you know, so it's not
Yeah.
like go to, you know, this house, like you know, Paul, we'll see later, you know, he's supposed to go to this specific house, and that's where he is, you know, he's healed after he's been blinded on the road to Damascus.
There was a footnote in my reading that said that the words for this room at some point were the same words that were used for the inn that had no room for them when they were, Mary and Joseph, looking for a place to stay the day that Jesus was born.
Interesting.
I think this was in Luke's gospel, and it said this is sort of a closed circuit, that they were finding finally this room that they had failed to find when they were pregnant. And
Yeah.
Hmm.
What I was going to say is that it's interesting that you know, he instructs his disciples, go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him, and wherever he enters, say to the owner of that house. You know, I mean, it just seems kind of, again, kind of a strange way to go about getting them to the place.
Well, talking about mood stuff, when they're at the supper, when Jesus declares that he's going to be betrayed, the disciples are distressed. And Jesus announces kind of doom for his betrayer, basically. Woe to that one. It would have been better for that one not to have been born. Not exactly cheery.
No.
Like, oh, I'll forgive you. Yeah.
Well, and I had to note, what were they thinking when Jesus is talking, you know, about the words, what we call the words of institution? They're really familiar to us, but you know, when he says, take this, my body, right? And then he takes the cup after giving thanks. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many.
Oh, we didn't actually read that part.
We didn't read that part?
these would have both been taboo
Oh, I
ideas.
guess we did, never mind.
They would have been what?
They would have been taboo concepts. Drinking blood, cannibalism. They're hard to understand.
Yeah.
Well, even to this day, Jews are against one having blood from another person, and don't boil. Oh no, that's milk. But you're supposed to be careful about the blood when preparing the animals too. So it is kind of incongruous. But he's giving up his lifeblood for them, and he's telling them that.
Yeah. But I'm sure they were, I mean, I just sit there and I think if I were at that dinner, I would have been like, what is he talking about?
One thing that that is coming through to me in this in Mark's gospel anyway is that Jesus is he seems confident and very directive, you know, like, do this. And the disciples are very obedient and they just do what he says.
One thing that I caught this time around, the times when he goes out to pray after the temple and again after the meal here, I just think back to a couple weeks ago we were looking at, you know, Jesus going off and praying, and you know, so kind of keeping that practice to some extent. Did anyone do a comparison on the Passover? Theirs?
Yeah.
You did? Oh, okay.
But on the meal, I focused mostly on what John was trying to say in his gospel, which doesn't line up at all with Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Yeah.
Mark is a much more brief approach to it. We don't hear the words of institution in Mark.
Well, we kind of do, actually.
I mean, in Luke,
Luke, okay.
misspoke. We don't hear the words of institution in Luke. Matthew and Mark are pretty much alongside one another.
Mm.
Just Mark is briefer.
Let's move to Gethsemane.
Mm. Emotions. Jesus is distressed and agitated. He
Mhm.
tells his disciples that he's deeply grieved, even to death. And then I've got some other stuff, but then I was like, by verse 41, it seems to me like Jesus is resigned to what must happen. Enough, the hour has come. Like he's just kind of, okay, whatever,
Yeah.
gotta happen.
Yeah, I think if the other ones, it seemed like he was sort of distant from everything. This is where he's really there. I mean, everything's
Yeah.
kind of
Mhm.
hitting him maybe. What other notes? Who did he take with him further in? Remember, it seems odd maybe, but he left some disciples behind and who did he take in with him? Do you remember?
Peter, James, and John.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Anybody that mean anything to anybody? Peter, James, and John? Those.
They are the ones that went to the Transfiguration. They're pretty much the core of the disciples.
Yeah, they're the ones that went up with Jesus to the Mount of Transfiguration.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Peter
This
and
is-
John were the ones that went to arrange for the upper room too.
This is the one where I did the comparison.
Yeah.
And I was glad that I delved into it because the part about the disciples sleeping was confusing to me. One of the other gospels, it says they were overcome. They were exhausted from sorrow. It was just too much.
So maybe things were really sinking in for them too. They had to deal with a lot.
Yeah, sleep can be one of the ways that we deal with stress.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's always hit me because I've had narcolepsy and I tend to fall asleep really easily. And to hear Jesus telling these disciples that he was very disappointed in them that they couldn't stay awake. I can understand Jesus' emotion. What he tells them to stay awake, and they don't.
Hmm.
Mhm.
I just think he must have felt really lonely in that moment because he wanted his closest friends to be with him and to support him, and they fell asleep.
Mhm.
Like there's just an element of like the really hard, I'm approaching something really hard right now. And we've all been there where you're approaching something hard and it really means a lot to have your closest friends or family around you to help you get through that. And all of a sudden he's just like, really? Now?
Does Jesus, I'm trying to think, does he ask his disciples to pray other times?
Oh, there was one place. Oh, shoot, was that last week? Right.
And then the other part would be to pray for him. And well, actually, on this one, what is he asking them to do? Pray that you may not come into the time of trial. I mean, it's not really praying for him.
There's something of where, in Jesus sends his followers, they were supposed to pray. Okay, that's Luke 10, 1-12. I gotta look at that up.
It probably is in John's telling that he's really concerned about whether Peter can overcome Satan. That he's finding this a very difficult experience. Peter is. And of course, Peter denies Christ 3 times. How much less severe is that than the kiss that Judas gives Christ?
I
Yeah.
found something. So in Luke 10:2, when he's sending out the 70, this was from last week, he tells all the 70, therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. That's
Oh, okay.
praying. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
And in Matthew, he asked asked the disciples to pray for more workers. I guess that's the same one. You said Luke, but it's in Matthew too,
Okay.
about the kingdom.
Okay. Vicky, any observations from the comparison you did on this one, the other gospels?
Yeah, well, in Matthew, there's more about how Jesus is feeling. I think it says, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. And then in Luke, an angel appears to strengthen, to give support to Jesus. And also in Luke, Jesus sweats a lot as he prays.
Oh, is that the one where his tears turned blood, right?
Yeah, it could be blood, like well, in my Bible, in my study guide notes, it said sometimes when people are in an extreme crisis, they will actually ooze blood, like sweat blood. That could have been happening.
Interesting.
Well, because we did that one too, and our Bible said that section with the angel and the sweating with blood was actually added later to Luke. It wasn't part of the original writing.
Yeah, there's some brackets on that, right?
Yep.
Okay.
I think this is where there's a funny little anecdote about somebody that was a young man in the garden, and he runs away naked, leaves behind his light robe.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with the point that is trying to be made. I think it's just a funny thing that got added in.
And I wondered about that too, if there was more symbolism to it, or is it just something that happened?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it maybe it has a little bit of the nakedness, thinking of Garden of Eden.
My study Bible says that it was probably Mark. He just wanted to add this to the story.
Oh,
So
he's
Mark
writing
himself
himself
was
into the story.
Yeah.
he ran away. Well, because it does say they all ended up deserting him, and stuff. So, yeah. Huh.
I was looking to see if I could find a picture to show you of some of the olive trees at the Garden of Gethsemane, but I can't find it.
I kept wondering my Bible has a map of that area, but it doesn't show the Garden of Gethsemane. And so I was like, where is that? Where is it? There.
Yeah, at least the site that they have, if you're looking out, hang on, let me see if I can pull up the picture real quick to give you an idea. But if you're looking at the Mount of Olives, or from the Mount of Olives toward Jerusalem, let me see if I can find that for you here. All right, hang on, let me share my screen. So this is a view from the Mount of Olives, looking out Looking out, of course, over Jerusalem and the Temple Mount is in here. And this is the Kidron Valley. I don't know if you can see my cursor. And then I'm not sure if you can see the Mount of Olives, or I mean, the Garden of Gethsemane would be off a little bit to the right edge, I think, and then down at the base of the Mount of Olives. Let's see if there's another. Yeah, I'll see if I can find. It was pretty cool. I will say that when we were there, they were harvesting olives. Oh, here we go. Here's a couple of pictures. All right, hang on a second. Yeah, oops. Here. Okay, here we go. So here are some olive trees at the Garden of Gethsemane, and some of these are really old, and I'm not sure how olive trees work exactly, but the trunks can get really big and sort of gnarled like this. But they're also, I think, they're maybe impossible sort of to date. Anyway, there are some trees here that people believe could date back to Jesus' time. I mean, they're just massive, around the trunks and stuff. But they're actually, this is the Garden of Gethsemane, and you can see people kind of in the shade there that are harvesting. So they'll put down tarps underneath the olive trees and go through and just kind of, try to pluck all the olives off and let them fall on the ground, and they collect them. And one of the there are volunteers that do this. And one of the volunteers approached some folks from our group, and kind of handing through the fence, they're giving us little olive leaves. So I've got a few olive leaves from Garden of Gethsemane. It's kind of cool. All right.
I read that the name Gethsemane means oil press.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else on the comparisons or anything from that passage? Yeah. And if you have a chance, really take a close look at the stained glass in the sanctuary. That's Garden of Gethsemane, and see how the artist depicted that there. So okay, Mark 14:43. So Jesus is arrested. What would you say Jesus' mood is here?
Well, I said, well, first I said, okay, so when Judas betrays Jesus with a kiss, one disciple is so angry that he cuts off a guard's ear with a sword. And then I was like, were the disciples really all carrying swords? Or was it a knife? That was interesting to me, because I wouldn't think of fishermen carrying swords. So it had to, anyway. And then Jesus, like his questions, like, kind of, come on, really now? Like, you're arresting me now at night, hidden, like when I was out in public so many times. I don't know. And then all the disciples desert him and run away. So talk about loneliness.
I think he was kind of shaming those who came after him, though, that they came at
Oh,
night.
exactly.
Yeah,
Like, why couldn't you arrest me when I was standing there?
and in public,
Great.
in front of everybody.
But he seems to be kind of strong here. It seems like, he's got his resolve now.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
okay, this is going to happen. Let's do this.
Mhm.
The swords, I don't know which gospel it was, but Jesus comments to the disciples around the same time that they should sell their cloak and get a sword. And one of the
Oh,
disciples
okay.
says, I've got 2 swords. And Jesus says, that's plenty.
Okay.
So what he intended to do with those swords, I don't know, but he was concerned that the disciples should have a sword.
Yeah, okay. I missed that.
How would you describe the authorities and the disciples here?
The disciples are scared. I mean, they're freaked out, like oh my gosh, are they gonna arrest us too? I mean, why else would you run away?
Yeah.
Well, and so let's see. Hold on. Was it in Matthew? Hold on. We have Matthew 26. One Bible study that we did talks about how many soldiers actually came. Is that in 26? Let's see. I wrote that
It
down.
sounded more like a mob of people that weren't soldiers that were there.
Well, but it talks about, oh, maybe it's not Matthew. Shoot. Oh my
Well, yeah,
God.
you're right. It just says there was a crowd with swords and clubs
Okay, there's
that
one.
had come from the chief priests.
Well, in my study Bible notes, it says crowd armed with swords and clubs, auxiliary police or servants of the court assigned to the task of maintaining public order beyond the precincts of the temple. At least some of the Roman cohort of soldiers were in the arresting group along with officers of the temple guard. The fact that some carried clubs suggests they were conscripted at the last moment.
Picked up baseball bats, basically.
Shoot.
Who did a deeper dive on this one? Anybody? Use the rest. We have a note in our study Bible about it was this passage here that had the young man going off naked, and there's a note here that says some scholars connect the young man to passages in the secret Gospel of Mark, mentioned in a disputed letter of Clement of Alexandria, discovered in the 20th century. And there's a really, I didn't have time to really dig into it too deeply, but in 1958, there was a scholar that discovered a fragments of a text, the secret Gospel of Mark, at a monastery out in the desert east of Jerusalem. And then there's some speculation as to whether or not some people think it was a forgery. Some people think it really was maybe written by Clement of Alexandria back in the, I don't know what that would be, the I don't know if that's quite the first, maybe I'll go with the 3rd century, but I'm not 100% sure. And anyway, so yeah, there's some question about that, and then there was a book that was written that kind of speculates that maybe it was kind of somewhere in between that. But
yeah, I think we have to be aware that there were a lot of writings that weren't included in the canon.
oh,
in
sure,
the
absolutely.
Bible, and some of those are more controversial than others, but I think the majority of them were at least considered, whether they were appropriate or not.
Mhm.
At least the more common ones that we come across. I've got a book up on here on my shelf, says the Complete Gospels, and it's a book as thick as the Bible, and none of them are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John.
Huh.
Okay, I found something in John 18. It talks about, so Judas brought a detachment of soldiers together with police from the chief priests and the Pharisees. Okay, and they came with torches and lanterns and weapons. Okay, so then I have a note from this one Bible study that we did. The Greek term Spira, it's Speira, which is how we have translated detachment. Anyway, Spira means there were at least 600 to 1,000 Roman soldiers plus temple guards. So if that is true, they expected a heck of a lot of resistance and they didn't get it.
No, they sure didn't.
Interesting. Well, remember Jesus, slips through the crowd, right?
Yeah.
When at his hometown, when they're going to throw him off the cliff. So maybe
Yeah.
they knew that and they wanted to make sure. Let's make sure. I want to make sure we get through these tonight. We're go to Mark 14:53 now. Jesus taken before the Sanhedrin. Oh, by the way, I wanted to point out that in the preparing for the search, and they have the definitions here. It says Bethpage, but it's missing an H in there. Bethphage,
Yeah,
Bethpage or Bethpage, different. So anyway, yeah. So Jesus taken before the Sanhedrin. Yeah, there's kind of a lot going on here. What are some of your? Well, first of all, anybody do a deeper dive on this one? Okay. Yeah, so false charges are brought against Jesus. Ironically, what is it that convinces them that that he's guilty?
Because Jesus answers, I am.
And then he says a little bit more, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the question that I had, because when the high priests tore their cloaks, they wonder how sincere were they? Because were they really sincere? Like, this guy is really causing some problems and we need to keep the Jewish faith pure and this is going to go all kinds of crazy places. Or were they just power hungry and, doing that as a posturing kind of thing to look like they were being distressed or whatever?
I love that struck you because it totally struck me too. And I was like, okay, wasn't that for grieving that you struck your rent your clothing? So you should say what you said.
Or penance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I think this claim that Jesus had said something about the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven really distressed the ones that could remember what Daniel's prophecies were, that he had a vision and he talks about the Son of Man coming on the clouds and taking a rightful place as a religious king.
and I want to piggyback onto that, John. This is where I'll advocate for a different reading of Daniel, like we've been talking about, as opposed to Daniel taking place in a historical sense. But if we read Daniel as apocalyptic literature, that's written kind of a coded language that was written during a time of persecution with Antiochus Epiphanes and so on, that Jesus is making reference back to that, like he is the one who will sort of purify things, and kind of be that leader. And so that would have been fairly fresh on the minds of the people then, because that was only just a few hundred years earlier. I mean, it seems like a long time for us, but I think in their memory that wasn't that long ago. And so I think there's some element in here. Jesus is making a reference to who he is and what he's going to do, and that further just inflames them, so. But I was thinking that on some level, the chief priest doing that, I think it was maybe dramatic effect and things. There might have been some element of sort of like, what just happened here is so terrible that just in case, I'm gonna, tear my clothes and everything because, God's gonna strike this Jesus guy down, and I don't want to be too close to that, because he's just blasphemed. Well, at least in
We think of the people in the Middle East reacting differently to grief with their wailing and more outward show of sorrow. And I think probably they are more demonstrative of their emotions than, say, the European American culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're also maybe in a frenzy here, that kind of crowd frenzy.
Mhm.
Yeah. And plus it's fairly late at night. People have, been called together for this, or maybe they were even preparing for it, probably, like tonight's the night we've got, Judas has tipped us off as to where we're going to find Jesus. So, you guys be ready. And, yeah. And again, under, in the darkness.
Mhm.
Makes me wonder about how serious they were about the Passover, the Passover meal and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
If they're preparing for this.
How about Mark 15, first part of that, Jesus taken before Pilate. Anyone do a dive into that one? Okay. Yeah, what are some of your thoughts here?
I put Jesus refuses to defend himself to Pilate, and Pilate is amazed. Pilate realizes, quote, that it was out of jealousy, end quote, that the priests want to kill Jesus. So anyway, and he's trying to convince the chief priests and everybody to let him free Jesus, but ends up giving in to them.
He didn't want to lose his position.
Exactly, because he was not well liked at all. I mean, not that they're really going to like an oppressor, but yeah. And I heard somewhere that like his posting to this backwater in Judea or whatever was kind of a demotion, because maybe Rome wasn't necessarily pleased with him either. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think in the Roman Empire probably would have been the less desirable places. If for no other reason, the people there, religion wise or whatever, in their minds might have been more fanatical. I think it's important to make a note here about how Jesus, who's responsible for Jesus being killed. It looks here like Pilate sort of gives in to the crowd. And yeah, I mean, he's kind of a political figure. And so, this crowd has been stirred up by the religious authorities to call out for Barabbas. So, he senses what's going on, and he senses the motives of the religious authorities. He kind of figures that Jesus is innocent, but he kind of goes along with this. And part of this, all of that leads into, I think, this kind of backlash against Jews. You heard the idea, people think that Jews were Jesus killers, and it has bred anti-Semitism, for centuries. It's weird. I can't comprehend that at all, because I don't know what people who think that, what they're thinking exactly, because Jesus is telling everybody that this must happen. So, why would that even be a thing? I have no idea, but it is.
Mhm.
And it continues to be that. And I guess there are idiots anyway that think this and would then, want to cause harm to Jews or something like that. I just cannot fathom it. But it's real, and I want to, acknowledge that's just a bunch of BS. And anybody who's read the scriptures would understand that, I've done actually kind of a little exercise before. Dave and I did this in a youth group way back in seminary, where we were talking about who killed Jesus, and we pulled out different passages, kind of like what we're doing here. We're looking at different passages, and then exploring who was responsible, and we came up with, it's really more complex than it might look. But some gospels, particularly John's gospel, really makes the Jews look pretty pretty bad and kind of evil and stuff. And it's been used by I guess Christian extremists for centuries as an excuse to bash Jews. And yeah.
Don't you think that the plays, the drama plays at Oberammergau have increased that? And a lot of people want to go to see it, and the shouting of, kill him and everything by supposedly the Jewish people just added to that, and that's been kept going for centuries.
Part of it is just that people want to find a scapegoat, so that who's to blame?
Nobody's to blame. It was God's plan.
But you want to find somebody to blame. We'll fix it by blaming somebody.
Yeah, I guess.
I am moved when we sing, oftentimes like on Good Friday at Tenebrae service, when we sing Ah, Holy Jesus. I was that denied you, I crucified you, is part of the lyrics of that. And the idea that it's human sinfulness, it's human nature, that we basically want to kill or supplant God. And that's a theme, hopefully you're recognizing throughout all the scriptures that we've studied so far. That people want to place themselves above God, or feel like they don't need God, and when confronted with it, rather than submitting, we'll try to either run away or overpower. So yeah, we crucified Jesus.
Good point to think about there, Matt. I am wondering, were the everyday people this against Jesus, this riled up against Jesus, or was it mostly the power structure, the elite people who were upset with him to the point of wanting to kill him?
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good question. I kind of feel like there's maybe a little bit of a crowd mentality. I mean, we see that today, don't we? You have powerful people that tell people one thing, and all these people just believe them. And so, you have people these powerful people walking through the crowd saying, hey, vote for Barabbas,
It's strange that you could convince a crowd that they should take Barabbas and let him go, or he'd led an insurrection and people were killed during that insurrection. Certainly justifiable that the Roman government would punish him, versus what Jesus had done. He really shouldn't have even been in the Roman court system, because what his crime was a religious crime. It wasn't a crime against the state, it was a crime against the church.
We had a resurrection. We had an insurrection here, right, in our country. And it's hard to I look at this passage differently now. there are people that feel like the people that have been convicted of crimes on January 6th, were heroes, they're political prisoners, they're innocent. I mean, all these kinds of things. And they're the people that be saying, yeah, we want Barabbas, don't give us Jesus, So, and if you are, if you feel like there is a time for an insurrection, and that's the way to move forward your political means or political ambitions, as is happening here in America as well, then Barabbas is kind of your man. He's a man of action. Jesus has done these wonderful things, maybe these miracles, but he's not coming through for us the way we want him to. To stand up to Rome. And that goes back to, we didn't really dig into it much, but go back to the triumphal entry. What kind of king are we seeing entering into Jerusalem here? What kind of figure? And again, we didn't touch on that a whole lot because Mark doesn't play that up like Matthew does. So
we
yeah,
didn't
crowd
read
mentality.
the section that somebody in the Sanhedrin says it's better that one man die than our whole institution go down.
Yeah. Was that in this one too? It was in John. I know John does that. There's a great irony, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just struck, that Jesus is so silent before Pilate. I mean, I'll have to say, I every time I read these passages like we're doing for tonight here, I'm just so moved by it, and I find myself, even though I just said I know, read the scriptures, these things have to happen. I read them, and it's sort of like I keep hoping that something different is going to happen. That now he's going to say something.
And it is interesting that he was very vocal with the Sanhedrin and he was not in front of Pilate.
Yeah.
Like he was going right at the religious leaders, which probably wasn't all of that unlike what he was doing in the temple and all those things, all the rest of his ministry too. So I don't know if it was a cultural piece where it's like, when I'm within my own community, I'm going to have a conversation and an argument. But when I'm in front of the secular government, maybe that's, I don't know if that's part of it, but.
Yeah, I think it was at the point where if you tried to debate with these religious leaders, you might have logically won your debate. You wouldn't have changed their opinion. They were locked in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, it was going to happen, just like he said. Just like he said. All right, the crucifixion. Now I did a dive into this. Oh no, I didn't do it. No, I did the tomb actually. Anybody dive into the crucifixion? Some of you maybe didn't dive into any of these. Okay. All right, let's look at the crucifixion. It's a longer passage. What are some of the things that you noted in your reading?
Lots of people making fun of Jesus.
Yeah, everybody was
Mocking
deriding
him.
him. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. What else?
We for one of our exercises look at the his near ending words, my God, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Other than his being crucified, I think that's one of the key points that's in this verse. set of
Yeah.
verses.
Mhm.
Yeah, I want to talk about that some more here in a little bit.
I think it's interesting that there was a lot of mocking from the crowd, but then not that much later, they were like, we'll see if Elijah will come and get him. Like, I don't know how much of it was mocking and how much of it is like them trying to reconcile. We've seen and heard of some of the things that he's done. maybe Elijah will actually come get him. And so
Mhm.
kind of like, I'm going to wait around and find out just to see, so you get kind of the fickle crowd. Like, how much are they really, really intentionally being terrible when they're mocking him, and how much of it is just like, somebody sitting around waiting to see what happens.
Hmm. Hmm.
I found it interesting that Mark's telling of the two criminals that were crucified with Jesus. Neither one of them is supportive of Jesus. They both are mocking him.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, that fits with the theme. Everybody's mocking him.
Yeah, I mean, people
Right,
walking
but
by
it's
are mocking him.
a
I
different
mean,
story than I don't remember who it is that says one of them said, we were bad guys and we deserve what we're getting. This
Yeah, it's in
Jesus
Luke's
wasn't a
gospel.
bad guy. And then it ends up with the statement, today you will be with me in heaven.
Very nice. Different.
Yeah, I don't know who the preacher is. You can probably Google it and find it. But there's a clip from this sermon. I've kind of felt like I want to maybe pull up that sermon sometime and just give that sermon, because it's really good. But he's telling the story like through the perspective of the one thief that goes to heaven. And he goes to heaven. Anybody just ring any bells? Just let kind of nod here. But he goes to heaven, and Peter's there, and he's looking through the records, and he's like, trying to figure out why he's on the list. Why is he going to heaven? And so it's this whole thing kind of plays out just like if you imagine if you go to a restaurant and you say, well, I've got a reservation, there's some question about it, and these people are talking. And somebody else comes out and says, well, what's why are you here? And he's like, I don't know. And they start asking him things like, well, can you recite this doctrine, or all this kind of stuff? And he's like, I doesn't know any of these things. And he said, well, why are you here? And it's like, well, because that guy said I could be here, or the guy in the middle cross, I think, said I could be here, I think is what he says. And so it's pretty cool. So I don't do it justice. You have to, he has really good, whoever the preacher is, really good delivery on it and stuff. And plus he's, I think, maybe Scottish or something, so he's got the accent going too. I noticed that there are female disciples that are there,
Mhm.
right? At the distance, the men are nowhere to be found.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And the same happens when you get to the tomb too.
yeah.
Not on the resurrection, but when they're actually going to bury him.
Yeah.
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 I think there's some elements here that, well, there's probably a lot going on, a lot of patriarchy and maybe misogyny, I don't know. But certainly I think women in that culture could fly a little more under the radar. I think it would be, maybe putting it kindly, but that might be some element there. But I also think it's a mark of their faithfulness. And even if they could fly someone under the radar, there still would be known followers of Jesus and everything. So I think there's so much there's so many little snippets that we miss. I wish they had a chance to rewrite the Gospels and in the sense of like, okay, let's tell us more about some of the women here, and throughout the New Testament, really, that play an important role in Jesus' ministry and the ministry of the church afterwards. And we have to really dig into these little snippets that we find. But yeah, the men are just nowhere to be found. How about the Roman centurion? What happens?
Well, it says truly this man is God's son. 1-41.
Why? What do we think leads him to that conclusion?
The curtain of the temple tearing. I don't know that he could see that, but I don't know.
Well, he said he was observing how he died.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No whining, no fussing, just,
Well, and then it happened so quickly. Like,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
because sometimes it took days.
right.
Yeah.
Why would that did it happen quickly? I wonder, why would that be impressive, I guess, you think? I don't have any idea.
Well, even when what's this, Joseph of Arimathea goes to request the body, and the next one, Pilate has to go like ask for proof that he's actually dead. I don't know.
See,
Yeah.
this is got people that had been in the tomb rising and walking around and alive again. I think that may have been part of what he was seeing as such an amazing thing. There was the earthquake, and then these people were dead people coming out of the tombs.
Yeah, that's in Matthew's
Yeah.
gospel.
That's in Matthew's, yeah. Yeah, that would be, I mean, I would, gosh, if I saw that, I'd be like, okay, I believe, but yeah, it's nowhere.
Yeah, it's not anywhere else. But how about the what the significance of the curtain in the temple?
Well, then there's no separation between God and people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, there's no separation anymore between God and the people. If you remember this story behind it, in the Holy of Holies, in the temple is where the Ark of the Covenant was, and the mercy seat, and the idea that God, that's where God sort of resides. And of course, in the Ark of the Covenant are the tablets with the 10.
The ark hasn't been there for some time.
What's that?
I said the ark wasn't there currently when this curtain came down.
Do we know that?
It was lost during, I think it was the Babylonian.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not really sure when it was lost exactly, but the idea still being that the Holy of Holies is where God resided and where the ark would have been, at least. And that it was only right on the Day of Atonement that the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies to pray on behalf of the people. And they, would tie a rope around the priest. The priest had bells or tassels that would make noise when he was moving around. And if they didn't hear the noise anymore, meaning that he had either fainted somehow or collapsed or died, that they could pull on the rope and pull him out, because you wouldn't go into the Holy of Holies. It's sort of like when the who was it that touches the Ark of the Covenant, right? That's kind of falling and they get struck down dead, for doing that. So the idea then that this curtain separating the Holy of Holies from sort of everyone else is torn in two, and the idea that now we are sort of face to face with God. And then in response to that, this centurion, a Gentile, becomes a believer. And it's not explicit in this, truly this man was the Son of God. It's not really explicit, but I think if we look at the Gospels and we look at what it means to, to be a disciple, is to profess Christ as, Son of God. So I would take that as as sort of a statement of confession.
No, I think it's a good question. That not only do we believe Jesus is Son of God, but where does that come from for us?
Right. Was that one of the questions in the reflection questions? Something along that line.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when we're talking about the centurion declaring he was a son of God, and in my footnotes, it takes it back to Mark 1:10, when Jesus came up out of the water being baptized, he saw heavens torn open, And God declared who he was. This is my son. So maybe, I don't know. I doubt that centurion was at his baptism, but
Yeah. But it's pretty cool.
yeah. I'm reading a book right now about the Jewishness of Jesus. And oh my goodness, there is so much comparison in his life to the ancestors. How he was saved by going to Egypt.
All right.
It just gives his father Joseph and who was the Joseph, one of the ancestors.
The other Joseph. Yeah.
Yeah,
patriarch.
and there's a lot of, this ties together a lot of the Old Testament with who Jesus is.
Mhm.
And it kind of surprises me because it's written by a rabbi. He obviously has great respect for Jesus.
How about the this last passage here? Jesus is placed in the tomb.
Well, I noted that Joseph of Arimathea boldly asks Pilate.
Yeah.
And like Sarah said, 2 women saw where the body was laid. Yeah.
Well, and the idea that not all the religious leaders were against Jesus, Joseph of Arimathea was being respected. John includes in that Nicodemus. So in the synoptic gospels, Jesus' body is wrapped and placed, kind of quickly into the tomb. In John's gospel, Nicodemus brings 100 pounds of ointments and things, and they do a little more preparation for his body, it sounds like, when they put him in the tomb.
And I think this is in partly so that you understand how the women knew where to go on Easter Sunday.
Yep. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and again, men aren't there. I did do a dive into this one, and yeah, Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus is added in John's gospel, and then of course Pilate, and the locations are pretty much the same, and so on. Jesus, the action taking place. The most important element, I thought about this one. What do you think the most important element of this story is? John was mentioning that the women learn where the body is, so that could be one of them. They know where to go on Easter. What else do you think?
Well, they confirm that he's dead.
Yes, they confirm that he's really dead.
Mhm.
Yeah, because we see not here, maybe next week, but we'll see that, there's some speculation, that Jesus' body, the disciples might come and take his body away, and things like that. So, or, that maybe he never really died. And so there's some element here in the Gospels that they're confirming for us that he really was dead. Any other?
But it sets us up for the story of Easter Sunday by having a stone in front of the tomb that needed to be moved away.
Yeah. So any overarching observations or questions from these readings that anyone wants to share?
Well, one of the things, I don't know, maybe it's insignificant, that I noticed that Jesus said, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. that they had no idea that they were playing into God's hands, so to speak, with this crucifixion.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that that is a juxtaposition of what we talked about last week, where he talked about keeping some of them in the dark so they wouldn't be forgiven. And so there's like a moment where part of it was closed off and not, and now it's like, you know, kind of a blanket forgiveness for their part in it. So that's just kind of an interesting dynamic.
Looking at these last words of Christ, we want to talk a little bit about the first ones here, the Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? What's the reference? What's the significance of that?
What struck me is that here is a moment to me when Jesus seems so human.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then somewhere in here, did it say read Psalm 22, which is where those lines start?
Yeah. I don't know if it said to read it. Was it in there? But that's
Yeah,
where it's
and the
from.
reflection. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and so reading through that whole psalm, it ends with such gratitude and devotion to God. You know, it starts with these words and then goes on.
Mhm.
I think in the context of this psalm, Jesus' words don't seem so desperate.
No.
My God, why have you forsaken me? Because part of this setting does talk about the rest of the, I don't know, it gives more context than just I have to give up because I can't imagine God did this to me.
This is also called the cry of dereliction, and some thought in that he is referencing Psalm 22, I think. Yes, and also some suggestion that this is a point where he's nearing death, and he is alone. You know, his humanness, and that God has literally forsaken him. That God is not there. We'll be talking about this at the class. Can't remember what we titled it. The death and dying class. We're going to start this Sunday, and I'll be looking at kind of our different concepts of what it means to die, and one element from the cry of dereliction here is that that death is not just physically dying, but death or hell being the same, I guess, would be being apart from God.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because he does. I mean, he has to go into hell. He doesn't get to go straight to heaven. Yeah.
So there's a sense there of being utterly apart from God, and I think it's really important for us to reflect on that, and think about then what the power of the cross is for us, that we don't have to experience that.
This psalm I recently read was known as the Great Hallel, and was part of the ritual for the Passover.
Psalm 22?
Yes.
Is that right?
If memory serves.
Hmm.
It's been a couple of days since I read that.
But it's interesting, to think about the different, well, of course, what people hear too, right? They think, well, maybe he's calling for Elijah, and the idea that they could call on Elijah if they needed help. So. Actually, out of just curiosity, that last question, which of these 7 last words captures your attention the most, and why? What did anybody put down for that?
I put, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit, because of that faith in God. No.
So I had 3. I couldn't choose. I had the my God, why have you forsaken me? But then I also had woman, here is your son, because Jesus is making sure that his mother will be cared for. And then I had, it is finished, and his work and his sacrifice are complete.
Mhm.
I went with woman, here is your son, here is your mother, because if you really kind of think about what he's saying here, he's basically just saying, please take care of my mom. Well, and I think that's incredible. That's one of the most human things I think that he did when he was on the cross.
I had Father, forgive them, because it's so different than what most humans would put into that context.
Yeah, the idea of forgiving. Any others?
Well, I put his forgiveness, and my other one was finished. God's plan was completed.
Yeah.
I had, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. It's like letting go. Let God do the work.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that this has been meaningful for you, and hope you'll consider joining us next week, right, for Monday, Thursday service, and then for Tenebrae. I think incredibly, moving time. Again, perfect timing here. Next week we look at the resurrection. So we will be meeting during Holy Week, and yeah. Anybody want to give Becca a ride back from the airport?
We'll have to miss this though.
Or if you know somebody,
Yeah.
if you know anybody that's coming back from SeaTac on the Wednesday afternoon, we don't have it figured out how she's getting home yet. Maybe the rocket, I guess, but
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
who planned that?
I would quickly correct what I said
Chicken.
about the Great Hallel. That's a different psalm than the one that we were looking at.
Okay. All right. Well, we're at 8:00. Is there anyone like to pray for us? Pray us out. I could ask an elder, maybe like Rosalie. Would you pray for us, Rosalie? You mind?
Our gracious Heavenly Father, we ponder over these scriptures, we learn, we question. We thank you for being with us and helping us to pull us all together, and each of us learn the message that you have for us individually. We thank you for your presence as we study and for your presence as we share. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. It was almost like you wrote that. It was
Yeah,
great.
beautiful. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.